Welcome to The American Story. Stories about all the things that make America the country we know and love. The American Story podcast is made possible through listener donations. You can simply visit our website at theamericanstorypodcast.org and click Donate. That's theamericanstorypodcast.org. Thanks to all of you in the land of the free who have given generously so that we can produce more stories and reach more listeners. This is Chris Flannery with the Claremont Institute. I call this one, Andy Ngo. After the American defeat in Vietnam in 1975, the victorious communists confiscated the homes, businesses, property, and savings of those South Vietnamese supposed to be counterrevolutionaries. These could be people working in government, law enforcement, the media or the military, religious leaders, or just business owners, including their families. Hundreds of thousands of these men, women, and children were forced into what were called reeducation camps, often to live in inhumane conditions, some for months, some for many years. They could be subjected to forced labor and aggressive interrogation and indoctrination. These aimed at breaking their will and compelling them to confess their guilt and affirm the truth of the Communist Party line. In increasing numbers throughout the late 1970s and 1980s, Vietnamese fled communist tyranny and became boat people, risking their lives and everything they had in extremely dangerous escapes to freedom. According to the best estimates, 200,000 to 400,000 of these boat people perished at sea, drowning, starving, dying of thirst or disease, or being killed by pirates. Of those who didn't perish, about 500,000 made their way to America in the 20 years following the communist victory. Two of these were Binh and Mai Ngo, who met during their escape, made it to America's West Coast in 1979, got married, moved to Portland, Oregon, worked hard, made a modest living, and according to their son Andy, achieved the greatest dream they could hope for: freedom. Mai would always say, "America is number one." Their son became an American hero. He is an American hero as I speak. Andy Ngo grew up and went to school in Portland, became a journalist, and against the advice of friends and mentors, took on what he called the dissident beat, because no one else would. This led him to reporting on a movement that had been around since the early 20th century, but was little discussed in the early 21st century, until it became almost a household word: Antifa. A revolutionary movement whose American operations have as their explicit aim destroying America. Like many of us, Andy Ngo didn't begin to become serious about being an American citizen until well into adulthood. He had taken his freedom more or less for granted, and hadn't really grasped his parents' experience in communist Vietnam, where there was no free speech, freedom of assembly, free elections, property rights, or freedom of religion. Then in his investigative reporting on Antifa, Ngo found in America a virulent strain of the same revolutionary communism his parents had fled 40 years before in Vietnam. In just the few years during which Ngo has been reporting, Antifa has made shocking progress in terror, destruction, and undermining the rule of law in America. The riots of the summer of 2020, the most destructive in American history, marked their most publicized victories. The violence of these riots has now become a way of life in many cities, replacing the rule of law. Andy Ngo's reporting showed how Antifa achieved these victories, and how, in the face of the assaults by Antifa and their allies, American governments chose not to defend the basic rights to life, liberty, and property of American citizens. He also showed how Antifa's anti-American and anti-freedom ideology is brought into the mainstream with the aid of the Black Lives Matter movement, corporate media, and the Democratic Party. Because of this reporting, Andy Ngo was attacked and brutally beaten as a reactionary, just as his parents had been imprisoned and persecuted as counter-revolutionaries in communist Vietnam. On June 29, 2019, in the midst of what the media reported as a mostly peaceful protest in Portland, Oregon. A swarm of attackers dressed in black and wearing masks and tactical gloves knocked down, punched, and kicked him, stole his camera, sprayed him, threw objects at him, cursed him, and laughed at him as he dragged himself away. Video of the last parts of the attack spread across the country and around the world. In an emergency room later, doctors found that his brain was hemorrhaging. He could have died. Andy is a small man with a gentle demeanor. He had never been in a fight. But the terrible beating did not discourage him from continuing his work. In his words, "The beating that day cemented my resolve in investigating the origins, ideology, and organization of Antifa." And he has continued doing this despite further beatings, threats to shoot him or set him on fire, terrorists stalking his family home and releasing his whereabouts on social media, and other threats and harassment. Andy Ngo's father suffered a stroke in 2018 and has not been himself since that time. But Andy says that his father's American dream lives on in me. It gives me the resolve to overcome the assaults, intimidation, and death threats to continue my work. He has gathered his reporting from the years 2019 to 2021 into a book titled Unmasked: Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. All Americans should know about the things he reports in that book. Much that he reports is ignored by the corporate media. But the book is also, as Andy says, a letter of gratitude to the nation that welcomed his parents as equal citizens years ago, though they were just penniless refugees from the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. It is all the more heartbreaking, then, that just as Andy Ngo's parents had to escape Vietnam to seek freedom, Andy Ngo was forced to conclude that for the sake of his own freedom, he had to escape America. Thanks for being part of the American Story. This is Chris Flannery with the Claremont Institute. I encourage you to visit our website, theamericanstorypodcast.org, to learn more about these stories and how you might support them. That's theamericanstorypodcast.org.